Okay, welcome everyone to another tutorial. This time we're going to cover the Skierg. With me today I have Thiago. He's going to demonstrate, and I'm wearing sunglasses because we're outside in Mallorca and the sun is shining as always. Before we get started with the actual technique, we're going to show you something crucial that you want to do every time you ski on a different Skierg, which is setting up the perfect damper, which is modifying the drag factor of the machine. Identifying your ideal drag factor is very important because it allows you to get the same workout at different Skiergs. And with wear and tear, for example, of the flywheel, but also of the cords, the relationship of drag factor and damper is going to change. And setting your drag factor will allow you to always ski at the right intensity. So here we have a relatively new Skierg. On a new Skierg, the drag factor goes up to 150 at the highest and around 50 at the lowest. We basically just go to the menu, then go to more options and select display drag factor at the top. All we have to do now is we have to start skiing. And after just a couple of strokes, the monitor is going to display your drag factor. Now as we change the damper slightly, continue skiing, you can see that the drag factor is going up. Now you might be asking, what is the ideal drag factor to ski at? And this certainly depends on a lot of different things. Certainly on your height, on your weight, and also on the gender. Because men usually carry a bit more muscle mass and can produce a bit more power, so they should ski at a higher drag factor than the ladies. As a usual recommendation, we would go with 70 to 110 for the girls and 80 to 120 for the guys. Now we have it set to 103, which is about right for Thiago. It depends a bit on what you're doing on the Skierg. If you want to hit like really high power output, max wattage for like a sprint or for effort, you want to take it up even a bit higher. If you go for a very long distance, let's say something from 20 to 40 minutes, this is about right. Now let's get started on the actual skiing part. The very first thing is very basic, and it's the setup. Here we have a Skierg with a floor stand. That means we have kind of determined boundaries of the platform on the floor. If you have a Skierg that is attached to the wall, this might be different, and you might want to use something else as a relationship to how far or how close you want to stand in front of the Skierg. So how far or how close you stand from the Skierg or from the flywheel certainly depends on your height. If you're a bit taller, you want to stand a bit further back. If you're a bit shorter, you want to stand a bit closer to the monitor. So Thiago is going to step on now. He's going to start with about a shoulder width stand, which is appropriate for most people, and is basically going to grab the handles from here. So when we grab the handles, it is very important that we have this lip of the handle resting on the side of our palm, and that we have a very loose grip. So we don't want to over grip where we really tighten the grip. We also don't want to under grip where we just have too loose of a grip and might risk losing the handle when we ski at a hard pace. But the handle should be sitting above your calluses, just in the tips of your fingers, with your arms mostly relaxed. Now the Skierg is a mostly anterior chain dominant movement opposed to the rower. We always have a bent arm. A bent arm about 90 degrees is a strong arm on the Skierg. That means Thiago's approximately having this position in his elbow when he's going to start the stroke. Then, as I just said, we have an anterior chain dominant movement. That means most of the action is coming from the abdominals, the hip flexors. We also bring the shoulder into extension by moving the elbow back, so we involve the lats as well. So basically our finish position is going to be with a bent hip and a hinged position, slightly bent over, with our shins mostly vertical and our weight distributed evenly across the whole foot. This is the finish position. Now come back up to the top and show the finish position again. So here it's very important that we don't turn it into a squat. As I said, it's mostly an anterior chain dominant movement. That means we want to utilize our core musculature, especially our hip flexors, to bend at the hip and then pull the handles with our arms and our lats. Once we have these two positions dialed in, we're going to move on to the correct sequencing. The sequencing on the Skierg doesn't come as natural as on other machines like the rower, because here we want to catch the flywheel at the right point, and the actual motion that we use to accelerate the flywheel is a much shorter range of motion than you might think. So let me say this in a different way. The amount of cord we're going to displace from the top of the stroke to the bottom of the stroke is actually not a huge distance. But when we get started on the Skierg with our sequencing, the first thing we want to get right is get the flywheel spinning. So we do a little drill where we just use the hips to isolate the movements a bit and make a complex movement a little bit simpler. So Thiago's going to grab the handles, and now he's just going to crunch from the top with his bent arms and just using his ab and hip flexors to initiate the movement and also get the flywheel spinning. As you can see now, the flywheel is spinning. He's already collecting some distance on the monitor, and this is basically how we start the flywheel and how we start from, and this is also how we do a dead start. That means when the flywheel is not spinning, we want to do maybe 1 or 2 of these strokes, which we call like half strokes, just to get the flywheel into motion. Once we have dialed this in, we continue with our sequencing where we engage our lats and move our elbows back, and then also extend at the finish. So Thiago is going to display now the full ski stroke, setting into a nice rhythm. And as you can see, he always maintains the sequencing in this exact order. That means the hips are going to initiate, and then he's going to finish with his elbows pulling back and extending his arms at the bottom. It is very important that you don't move your elbows back too early, as you would then kill all of the power which should come from the hips, and your hips are certainly much more powerful than your arms and shoulders alone. Now we're going to talk about the correct strokes per minute, as it might be very different from the rower. The strokes per minute is something you can see on the performance monitor. As you can see, there's a 28 displayed right now with a S/M, which is standing for strokes per minute. This certainly depends on your height. Shorter athletes usually have a higher stroke rate, whereas taller athletes usually have a lower stroke rate. We recommend staying between 35 and 45 strokes per minute for most of your workouts. We also want to vary our stroke rate when we ski at different intensities. When we do a very low intensity long ski that is maybe just a recovery effort, or in a low intensity training piece, you want to hold a lower stroke rate. Because with every stroke you have to brace. That means your abdominal musculature, your diaphragm, your intercostals, they have to contract, and that makes it a lot harder to breathe. Especially for beginners, we recommend using a slightly lower stroke rate so you can breathe freely and you're as relaxed as possible throughout the stroke. If you get more advanced, you can also hold a higher cadence or higher stroke rate on these lower intensity efforts. But then if you go for a harder effort, you always want to use a higher stroke rate, because as I said, the displacement of cord is relatively short, so we want to act in this very short range of motion and always catch the flywheel at the top as fast as possible, so we have a quick recovery and engage the flywheel as soon as possible again. So that means we want to increase our stroke rate for hard efforts. So Thiago is going to start at a 35 strokes per minute now, and then is going to increase over time to a higher stroke rate. So you have a visual representation of what a good skiing stroke looks like. So now he's very relaxed and just skiing at an easy pace. And now he's going to increase his stroke rate slightly to around 40 strokes per minute. And finally 45 strokes per minute. As you can see, it's very important that the technique always stays the same. And because you increase the strokes per minute doesn't necessarily mean you have to hold the same effort. That means you can also slow down your effort and ski at the same pace, but this is something that takes a lot of practice. So we would recommend prioritizing good technique at the start first, and then increase your stroke rate over time, but only go as fast as your technique can tolerate. Now let's talk about the relevance of skiing for the HYROX race. And you can certainly not win the whole HYROX on the Skierg, but you can definitely make it a lot harder for yourself if you overpace or have bad technique. That's why we would always recommend throughout the race, keep your technique as smooth as possible, as we just demonstrated. Always go back and practice some of these drills and ski at different cadences or stroke rates to get comfortable across a broad range. And then for the actual pace, we recommend doing some testing. Test your 2K in training as hard as possible, and then add 10 to 15 seconds to that for your next HYROX race. Now that concludes it for today. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.